afternoon. This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of the Business Education Spotlight, ThinkTech Hawaii. Welcome and thank you for watching the show. Today, my guest is Doug Levinson. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you.
Let me give some introduction of Doug first. Doug is the chairman of the board of Convention Data Services in Massachusetts. For over 25 years, his company has provided state-of-the-art registration database management, exhibitor lead retrieval services, and event marketing to the trade show industry, serving the needs of businesses and nonprofit associations nationwide. So for four consecutive years until 2011, Convention Data Services was named to the exclusive Inc. 5000 annual ranking of the 5,000 fastest growing private companies in the country. Now, more about Doug. He has an extensive and diversified knowledge of business operations and management. For over 37 years of experience in vendor and client relations and multi-location management has made him a strong leader with a proven track record. Now, he's semi-retired and living in Oahu since July 2013. He's volunteering at the Iolani Palace, the Waikiki Aquarium, and is a regular guest speaker at the University of Hawaii Shidler College of Business, as well as the Curry College in Massachusetts. Welcome once again, Doug. I remember meeting you back in April,
right.
And you had your first, I think it was, no, the second presentation to an undergraduate marketing class in convention management, and I thought I would sit in, and I learned a lot from you. So when this opportunity came up to host a program, you were one of the few people I thought that I should have as a guest. And after that presentation, I remembered because I went to a conference afterward, the Hawaii, the Healthcare Finance Management Association conference, and I had a table set up, and I remember some of the lessons that I learned from your presentation of following up and asking myself, okay, what is the return on investment for attending the conference? But enough said. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and perhaps the first question is, what brought you to Hawaii?
Well, that's easy. I can answer that in one word, and the answer is the people. I've been coming as a visitor since 1976. My wife and I lived in California for about 25 years before we moved to Massachusetts, and we continued to come as a visitor to Hawaii. And you know, you come here as a visitor and you meet the people in the hotels, you meet the people in the restaurants, everybody's very nice, very friendly, but when you get down to what I call the real layer of an area, and you start meeting people here that have nothing to do or connected with tourism, and there is a spirit and attitude, I know it's called the Aloha spirit, that permeates all walks of life here. And when our last child graduated college last May, we knew that this was the place we wanted to move. So we've been here since last July and have no intention of leaving.
Oh,
we love it.
That's wonderful. And you've planned this out for a long time then.
Planned it out for a while. We bought a townhouse some years ago. We had a tenant in there. You know, there's lots of nice places in the United States to retire that have lots of nice beaches, lots of nice scenery, but there's just something very special here.
Now, living here aside, you are semi-retired, so that means you're still working. So tell us
what
about
is that,
your work.
What does semi-retired really
mean?
I'm not sure sometimes. I have to ask myself that. I put together a transition plan, which I think is a very important part, that when you're running a small privately held business, that, you know, if there's a God forbid that happens to you, which is exactly what happened to my predecessor at CDS, or if it's planned, you've got to have a transition plan in place, which I did. And the person I wanted to put in as CEO when I left my company, Convention Data Services, which I refer to as CDS, I wanted to offer to him any type of consulting that I could do. He could pick up the phone anytime, even though he's in Massachusetts, I'm here, that I would be able to assist him on any types of strategic issues and plans, which is exactly how our relationship has worked for the last year. Also, the board asked me to step in the role of chairman of the board. So obviously I go back every 90 days as a board member, direct the board. Plus, where we have industry events for the industry, which I don't know if that makes sense, the whole trade show industry has a couple of annual events just for itself. Where are we going? How are we doing? What's our future? And so on. I also attend those sessions as well.
Okay, let's hold the thought about the industry event. Maybe for the audience's sake, especially after having attended your presentation, I realized that convention management is something that not too many people know, if you can, I mean, if this is correct to say. So give us a quick overview of what that really means. What is trade show management? And I guess really what have you done, or what did you do in the past 30 years?
You have about 2 hours. I can describe it to you. Or you want me to condense it down?
You have to ask Jay about that.
Okay, I'll ask Jay. The trade show industry, there's two basic divisions in trade shows, B2B and B2C, business to business and business to consumer. The consumer shows are the types of trade shows that most people are familiar with. A car show, a boat show, a job fair, a dog show. You come in, maybe you pay nothing, you pay $5, you come onto the floor, you see different booths, you might pick up a particular vendor's business card, you go home, you decide whether or not you want to do business with that organization, or you may learn something. That's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to are the B2B trade shows. These are basically bringing buyers and sellers together under one roof. You could have the B2B show that most people are familiar with is Consumer Electronic Trade Show, the big international CES show every January, I believe. And you've got 104,000 people that go to Las Vegas. And you've got all the major names on the supplier side, and you've got all the businesses who are looking to buy from these exhibitors. Even though the word consumer is in consumer electronic, it's referring to consumer electronics, not the actual consumer. You could not go to the trade show, I could not go to the trade show. We are not within that industry. So it brings buyers and sellers together, usually for 3 or 4 days. Now some shows can be very small. They can be in a meeting room in a hotel. Some of them can be in very, very large convention centers. There's approximately 9,000 B2B trade shows every year just in the United States. Obviously, they're all over the world as well. It's a major undertaking for an exhibitor to decide whether they want to actually exhibit at a show. Is that their customer who's going to be there? They buy, when I say buying and selling, there's not necessarily money that's changing hands on the floor. But these are, you could have somebody like, say, Best Buy, the retailer, that could be going into the Consumer Electronic Trade Show, and they could be placing an order for $5 million Samsung televisions, or the Microsoft software, those kinds of things, and they want to be able to see what is the latest and greatest that you're offering. In addition to that, you also have conference sessions. They're called breakout sessions, so there's a lot of education that takes place, so both the exhibitor and the attendee can learn more about, within their genre of their business, different things that are going on in their industry.
Yeah, it really sounds very different from what you were talking about earlier on business to consumer. I guess a few days ago I was reading in the paper and about Hawaii Trade Show. Maybe you can give us some perspective on that, because I guess this article in the Star Advertiser, they were talking about how Hawaii Trade Show was among the top 250, and I guess let me give you an overview first. And they were saying that the annual Hawaii Lodging, Hospitality and Food Service Expo is at number 232 out of 250. And they were talking about the local expo being in its 18th year with 300 exhibitors, 1,800 personnel, and about 4,000 plus attendees. Give us some context, and are we really at the top, or how does it compare to the other consumer trade show first, before we go back to the B2B trade shows?
Yeah, Hawaii's got a geographic problem when it comes to trade shows. Now, when you mention a trade show, what did you say about 4,000 attendees?
Yes,
okay.
4,000.
That's, from my involvement in the industry, that's a very small show. It's like the Olympics. You've got your top 10 runners, which are the best in the world, and they're up here. But the minute you start to get down to number 11 or number 20 or number 50, it drops off very, very quickly. If you look at the top 10 trade shows in the United States, and consumer electronic happens to be the biggest, If you measure it by number of attendees, and there's 3 different metrics you measure it by, but just by attendees, you've got 106,000 people that go to that show. Number 10 is probably down at about the 70,000 people. Number 20 is probably down at about the 40,000 people, and so on. So you start to drop off very quickly. But let me address Hawaii specifically. When an exhibitor decides to exhibit at a trade show, pick any major Fortune 500 company you want. Let's take Samsung for a minute, though it's an international company. A company like Samsung, a company like Microsoft, a company like Nikon, they're going to probably get approximately 500 to 700 requests per year to exhibit at somebody's trade show. Just think about that number for a second. I'm a chief marketing officer at a company, and I've got 500 to 700 solicitations to come be an exhibitor at your show. And you're going to try to convince me why yours is the best trade show I should go to. Your customers are going to be there, and so on. But from the exhibitor's perspective, they've got tremendous cost involved. They've got to bring their employees to wherever the show is, the airfare, the lodging, the housing. They've got to bring the actual booth there. Now, it's possible in Hawaii, which I'm not familiar with, from a trade show perspective, of whether there are local general service contractors that actually build the booths here. But usually, bigger exhibitors want to transport their booth, so they've got the booth. Then they've also got to trust the fact that they have enough of their attendees, their customers throughout the year, that are willing to pay the expense to go to Hawaii. There is no question everybody wants to come to Hawaii. Is it worth the expense? And one of your opening comments you made when you talked about you're going to a trade show and you were thinking about ROI, this is where ROI plays in. An exhibitor is going to sit down and say, what is my total cost to go to this show? I ran a show called Comdex, one of the largest, actually it was the largest technology show in the world when it existed, up until the year 2000. And Hewlett-Packard was one of our exhibitors. They sent 350 employees, just their employees, to the show. All the PCs, because they were showing off all kinds of PCs and laptops and all their technology. You can imagine just getting from Palo Alto, California to Las Vegas, of the expense involved. And then when they got there, all the dining, wining and dining that they wanted to do of their own customers. So you have this much expense. Are Hewlett-Packard's customers going to be coming to the show? Where are they coming from? Is it easy for them to get there? If they come back and say, not worth it, they're not going to go.
Give us some numbers, because you're looking at a large pool of not just employees going to the trade show, but all the other resources. How much money companies like Hewlett-Packard? Easily
I'll cut you off, I'll answer it. Samsung could pay upwards to $500,000 just for the booth rental, just the booth. One of the classes I teach at Scheidler at the U of H of trade shows actually has a picture. You may have seen it when you were in the class of what the Samsung booth looks like.
I did.
They had to have, I didn't count up the number, but there had to be 100 50-inch flat screen panels all up this wall that went from the ground, I don't know, it looked like it was probably 40 feet high, and it was probably quadruple the width of this room. And that was just the flat screen panels that they had there. So to spend $500,000 is very, very easy. You can get upwards to $1 million when you start throwing in the airfare and everything else associated with it.
Now, earlier on you mentioned that big companies like Samsung, they get requests, 500 to 700 requests a year to participate in different trade shows. So how do they decide which one to go? What kind of criteria do they use?
Great question. The first is, have they ever been there before? That's the first thing that comes up. Have we been to the show, and what was our ROI at this show? And it's not just financial ROI. What were you looking to accomplish last year, and was I successful? Maybe they had a new product launch, and they wanted to look at it. The second thing is the history of the show, if they're not familiar with it. And within the history of the show, tell me the demographics. Give me the demographics of the customers who go to the show, the attendees who go to your show. And I want to see if that matches up with who I know my customer to be. That's the question they'll ask. They will want to know whether their competition is going to be there. I had a case once at a show in Atlanta where it was a Sunday morning. The show floor had not even opened yet. And we had an exhibitor in the show office who was calling their CFO back in California, so it's like 5 in the morning in California, asking permission to sign up for next year's booth already, and they haven't even floored at this year's show, which was going to open in a couple of hours. And I asked him, I said, you know, you don't even know the success of this show. I have to know. To tell me, why are you looking to sign up? He said, because my competition wants to be here, and that alone will drive me to be here. So the big factors, my competition going, the attendees, the demographics, the history of the show, and have I had history with the show. And many times a chief marketing officer, because this all comes out of their budget, they're going to have to make a difficult decision. I only have X number of dollars in the pie that I'm going to allocate towards trade shows, and we're only going to go to 5 shows this year. This is all we can afford, and here are the 5. I'd love to go to another 8. It's just not in my budget.
Wow. Now you've got a lot of experience dealing with these different companies coming to trade shows. Are there some really impressive ones in terms of their decision making as to where to go, the plan that they put into, the plan and the thoughts they put into in running these trade shows, and the follow-up?
From the trade show manager's perspective, or from the exhibiting company's perspective? Because there are different answers to that question.
Okay, well, start with the exhibitor.
Okay, from the exhibitor. Microsoft is probably the best organized for making decisions of their metrics of exactly what they define as a successful show. I'm going to actually give you the opposite answer for a second. I was very surprised. I hope I don't get in trouble. No, I'll just give a generic name. There was a major car company, very high-end car company, that came to Comdex one year. And he said, well, what would a car company be doing there? And they didn't necessarily have highly technological stuff in their cars. It's just that they believed that their car's customer, the customer to buy their car, were the people who went to the show. And they set up a test track in the back of the gold lot of the Las Vegas Convention Center. So, and there was, at that time, I think there was about 95,000 attendees there. The line was out the door of people waiting to take this car all by themselves, half a mile, 3/4 of a mile test track around. And I'm watching them drive around. The driver got out of the car, the attendee got out of the car, turned to the rep from the company. He says, oh, thanks a lot, that was great. And the rep just pats him on the back and says, you know, want to do it again, come on back. And I go up to the guy and I say, how are you measuring whether or not this person who's going to go back home and maybe buy your car, whether this was successful or not? He said, we don't care. As long as they've been in the car and they've had an opportunity to drive the car, we just hope. I said, but wouldn't you want to measure the metrics to see? They never did. They never measured it. So, of course, they never came next year either. So,
I was going to ask you
that might have answered that question. But companies that have been doing this for years, they know their booth placement on the floor. They know exactly, depending on the product or service launch that they're doing, how many people to bring through lead retrieval. Now, lead retrieval is the device. It's hardware that we rent out in my company's CDS, but it's also more the software than the hardware of being able to scan a person and capture data about them. So if you register online, you get a badge, you have a 2D barcode. When you come up to the booth, you, the attendee, they will scan your badge. And we'll be able to get information about you that you're voluntarily surrendering. Surrendering sounds like an ominous word, but you're giving up the information about you because you want to be able to continue doing business with this company. Microsoft has it down to a science of how to do it.
So, yeah, glad you touch on that. So lead retrieval is something, I know you mentioned that it's bread and butter of your company. So what's the competition, the landscape? Who are your competitors?
There's basically 3 major players in our space. Experian is one. They're the 800-pound gorilla because they do housing, they do registration. They have many different components to their business. And then there's us, CDS, and one other company called CSI, where we are full service to the trade show industry. I came from the trade show industry, where I actually hired CDS as my vendor. And so I was on the trade show side first, and then I went on to the registration and lead retrieval side. So there's 3 companies, but there's many other niche players in the industry, but each one does one component of it very well. There's not a lot of companies that do all of it.
Okay, so you're the full service one.
Yes.
Then. I see. Now, we have been talking about companies here in the U.S. Are there particular trade shows in a certain part of the country that's more well attended, or certain part of the country that are more open, or what's the word?
Where people go to? You mean just attend?
Yeah.
Well, Las Vegas, Chicago, Atlanta, and Orlando are the big four venues. It's got a social element to it. Or they're easy to get to. That's what you need. You know, you have your business from 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. Well, when the show floor closes at 4 o'clock, what do people do? Now, you could easily say, but God knows Hawaii has that to offer as well, but you've got the other cost factors, which is why exhibitors are somewhat reluctant to do it here. But in those four cities, that's where the big shows. San Francisco is also very, very big. Anaheim's very big as well.
Okay, that's great. Hold your thought, and then when we come back, we'll continue to talk about the trade shows in the U.S. and broadening it up to talk about some of the trade shows and conventions internationally in Europe and Asia. My name is Alice Lee Hagan, host of Business Education Spotlight, ThinkTech Hawaii. My guest is Doug Levinson, Chairman of the Board of Convention Data Services in Massachusetts. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Welcome back. This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of Business Education Spotlight. My guest is Doug Levinson, Chairman of the Board of Convention Data Services. Before the break, you were telling us the 4 different states that have a lot of these conventions. Can you tell me, based on your experience, what are some of the strengths and what are some of the things that these different places offer?
Well,
and drawbacks.
Sure, I'll put myself back in the shoes when I was at Media Live, which was actually produced Comdex, N+I, some of these other large technology shows. As a trade show producer, and once you know about how big your audience is going to be, the first thing you have to look at is there a convention center big enough to handle it? And the 4 I just mentioned are the biggest in the country, so you do need large. You have to have the ability to have it easy for your attendees and exhibitors to be able to get in and out. And when you think about the 4 cities I mentioned, the access in and out of airports is very, very easy, or proximity to the town. San Diego's another one. Nice sized convention center, easy to get around. The pros and cons, a lot of it has to do with the attitudes of the hotels and the convention centers themselves. Now, I'm not going to name which is which, because I'll get in trouble if I say this. But you've got some of the cities that have an attitude of, you're lucky that we're having you here to do your show. And they do not negotiate the rates very well. It is difficult dealing with the unions in many cases. The fees that they charge for an internet drops for an exhibitor, because they've got to have an internet drop right in their booth, and because it's a unique, you have to have the cable, the pipe running right to the booth. The exhibitor's going to rent that, and in Samsung's case, they probably had to have many drops. Well, if you have an exclusive arrangement between the internet provider to the convention center, and the exhibitor is very, very limited in that they can't bring in their own pipe, basically, they're stuck with whatever they charge. And some cities are not very easy to work with in those regards. Some cities are not willing to negotiate much on their rates. So it's a bit of a game of chicken of, you know, are you going to threaten to move your show? But moving your show is very, very complicated. If you've had a show that's like Consumer Electronic, if you had that show in Las Vegas, you know, I think since its inception it's been there. That's what patterns are used to. You know, attendees, exhibitors, buyers and sellers, they know they're going to Vegas at that first week, second week of January. You suddenly change it to another city, people react very negatively to changing a show.
Yeah, sounds like, yeah, once you've established the trade show at a certain place, it's hard to...
But that being said, there are certain shows that intentionally every year will rotate. because they want to make it fair for people that, you know, somebody lives in San Diego but the show's in New York every year, it's hard to get to. But if they know that it's going to be New York one year, Chicago, Denver, San Diego, it basically is doing this circle around the country, that they know that there will be times it comes by their city.
So it really goes back to, it takes time to plan out events, so they need a lot of information beforehand, and it's a long lead time to actually get to the actual trade show or the convention then.
When I negotiated contracts to rent a convention center, I was negotiating 15 to 20 years out. And my answer to them would be I'm not even sure I'm going to be alive 15 or 20 years from now, and we're actually worrying about contracts. That's how far out you have to rent space for these major trade shows.
Wow, so if you have such a long lead time, what are some of the challenges then? I mean,
Comdex is a perfect example. I mean, Comdex was the granddaddy of horizontal technology trade shows. It went across all platforms. It was not specialized. Comdex doesn't exist anymore. You know, it was at its peak in the year 2000, and then when the general tech sector crash started to take place in early 2001, we realized that as the show we went through bankruptcy, came out of bankruptcy, that there just was not a need. Technology had become so specialized that you don't need this massive across-the-board type of show. Well, if I've negotiated contracts years in advance, that's a problem. Now, you don't put down money 15 or 20 years out. You reserve the space, but when you get within 3 to 5 years of the show, you're putting down money.
You mentioned technology, and I think that's a good segue into this question. Over the years that you've been in this industry, what are some of the technological and advances or innovation that has contributed to the trade shows, convention management?
It seems like every 6 months it's changing. It's no longer you know, years and years and years in change of technology. When I first got into the industry, and I think lead retrieval is a good example of that, we would rent out devices, actual pieces of hardware. There were these big clunky desktop, like a big calculator, and it had paper coming out of the back of it. And the exhibitor would rent it. The exhibitor would scan the badge with a device that was tethered to it, so they were somewhat limited if they had a big booth where they could walk around. The information was captured on this NCR register type of paper, and then you would rip it off at the end, and then somebody would go back to their office and they would type it in. And I'm not going back more than 8-10 years ago at this point when that occurred. Today, you use your mobile phone that has an app built right into it, go up to the badge, you scan the badge, and then the information is instantly transmitted back to your home office or whomever you want. You are able to put in custom qualifiers if you want to put in.
What is
it can go both ways. If I know that Alice Lee is a really, really big customer of mine, and I want to meet her when she comes in, when I go to, if somebody in my booth scans your badge, a message will pop up. Alice Lee Hagen is here. Go get Doug in the back. He wants to meet her. Instant information. I will be able to ask you questions on qualifiers. It's not just capturing information about you. It's what do you want? I mean, of the product that I'm selling. You know, if let's use Samsung again as an example. You're a buyer for Best Buy, and you want to put in a big order for TVs and Samsung. Now, my God, they sell refrigerators, they sell washers and dryers. It sounds like I'm becoming a spokesperson for them, but they're ubiquitous. And what is it specifically you want to know about? Okay, well, you're going to be buying Best Buy from the refrigerator and washer dryer line. I can hit a code that is customized for me as the exhibitor of that's what you're looking to do. What would you like? Would you like a follow-up sales call? Do you want me to just send you a quote? Do you want to have some brochures? So I can get very, very specific of what you're looking for, not just capture your name and address. So by the time you get back to your office in Honolulu, I may already have the local Samsung rep in Honolulu that's beating down your door saying, I understand you wanted me to follow up, you know, let's continue. So the whole idea is that the trade show is no longer about those 3 or 4 days. It can be a 365-day event. Prior to the show, exhibitors have the ability to reach out to you now. It's all about the data. It's no longer just about the ability to print a badge.
It sounds like the technology is really sophisticated in helping with conventions and follow-up and follow-throughs, but now that you're semi-retired, if you could think of another technology or technologies or innovation that would help out, what would that be?
NFC, near field communications, and also the ability, and this takes, I'll explain what it is, but this takes the venue actually getting involved, though you can set up towers at every entrance. The ability to track people's movements, which I know sounds very NSA, Big Brother is watching you.
And we have to talk about privacy.
Right, which is actually a problem explaining to the attendees. You want to know from a convention floor, the convention building's perspective, a trade show producer's perspective, where are the people coming on the floor? Are they all entering? You know, Las Vegas Convention Center, North Hall, Central Hall, has 11 separate entrances. Which doors are they coming in? Now that becomes a very big selling point to future sales to exhibitors, because when they want to sign up for next year's show, booth placement. Most of the customers are coming in this door. Where are they congregating? Where should we place the food courts? Because most people are coming. So that's on a very wide field. NFC is right down to the individual booth. If you look at a large booth, 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, I remember the Kohler booth at the Kitchen and Bath show. I mean, I don't remember the square footage. This thing was like a half a football field. It was massive. You want to be able to track people's movements within the booth. Are they all congregating over by the shower heads? Are they congregating by the faucets? And also, where are my salespeople? And the non-NSA portion of this is, it's not tracking individual names. I don't care, Alice Lee Hagen, what she's doing on the floor, but I want to know, are people on average coming on the floor for an hour, for 3 hours? Are they coming back off the floor 6 times a day? What booths are they going to? Not the name of the person, but just the fact that there's traffic. Where in the Kohler booth are most people congregating? And that allows exhibitors the very next day to make adjustments within the booth. Everybody's congregating here, but we wanted them all over here. So what can we move? That technology is coming right down the pike.
So how new is this technology then? Are trade shows using this type of thing?
Yes and no. Okay. It's probably been in existence for 3 to 5 years. Nobody uses it. Very few people use it. First, there's a gigantic cost. If you're going to bring in these individual towers, it becomes very expensive to move them around. The best way to do it is to put permanent towers in the buildings, and then you've got to overcome the whole security issue. You got to get the whole trade show, which means the show management and all the exhibitors on board, because if you've only got half the exhibitors using it, well, it's really not going to be able to show. Okay. You got to have everybody doing it.
So it's optional then?
Right now, yes.
Okay.
But it's headed that way because, again, trade shows are now all about mining the data. It's not a matter of 50,000 people coming to my show for 3 days and then going home. We want to be able to capture that data and use it after the show.
Let's explore mining the data.
Okay.
And I know I shared that with you. I guess a few days ago, both in NPR and The Economist, there was a story about right to be forgiven. I guess the article title is, "Should we have the right to be forgotten online?" And I guess it has to do with the European Court of Justice rule that Google and other internet companies, they may be required to remove old and irrelevant personal information from their websites. Now, this may be a stretch from convention, but obviously Europeans have a very different perspective on privacy law.
Yes.
And from the US. Your thoughts on that?
Well, how do I politely say it? It's wrong. It's dumb. You just said it yourself. You know, they get to determine what is irrelevant. Who determines what is irrelevant? Number one. Number two, you've got what, 28 members of the European Union? My understanding from this ruling is that each member, each country is then going to interpret what the law means. So if somebody's in Germany, if they're a resident in Germany, but they did something wrong 20 years ago in Spain, and you could still go into Google and find it on Google about what they did in Spain, well, does that law apply in Germany? But the biggest problem I have with it is that you're beating up on the search engines. You're saying the Googles, the Bings, the Yahoos, that whomever this entity is that's going to determine that it's irrelevant, is not they have to take it off of their database. But if this poor guy, I'm giving an example, did something wrong 20 years ago, it's still public record. Let's say there was a trial that happened 20 years ago of whatever this makeup person that I'm talking about did something wrong. It's still a public record. You can find the information other ways on the internet. So they're not saying the information can't be on the internet. They're just punishing the search engines. And to me, I don't know who the judges were in the Supreme Court ruling. I just picture people who are not technologically savvy, that their intentions are good. I will give them that. I understand what they're trying to do. Google, I believe, some years ago, actually tried to give a methodology for somebody to write a rebuttal, a comment about that if there was something that if I searched Doug Levinson and there was something I did wrong, that companies had the right to, or people had the right to go in and search my name and see what I did, but I had the right to go in and put a commentary in, which I thought was a pretty cool thing for them to do. It never went anywhere.
Well, Doug, hold your thought on that,
okay,
because I'd like you to make more comments about how the differences in interpretation of privacy law and how this affects your business. So we'll be right back. My name is Alice Lee Hagan, host of Business Education Spotlight. I'm talking to Doug Levinson, chairman of the board of Convention Data Services in Massachusetts. We'll be right back.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back. This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of Business Education Spotlight. My guest is Doug Levinson, chairman of the board of the Convention Data Services. Doug, before the break, you were talking about privacy law and the European Court of Justice ruling that some of the big internet companies and Google or Yahoo may be ordered to remove old and irrelevant personal information from the internet. Now, this is certainly very different from how we would perhaps do things here. How does that affect your business? And I guess I want to talk a little bit about the strategic direction of your company, which I was looking at online. And I guess this was from your CEO, John Kimball,
right,
and he was talking about the successes that you've had in Europe, Canada, and some of the Latin America markets. Give us some perspective on the European markets first, especially with a ruling like this about privacy law.
With or without the ruling on the privacy law, Europe is tough. They do not allow you to capture information about individual people. So if you're walking on a show floor, first when you register for a show, you're not going to put in all your pertinent information. I think you put your name and your company, and that's it. There's nothing else about you that is allowed to be given out. So right off the bat, a registration company like ours, as you alluded to earlier, our bread and butter is the lead retrieval. It's not the registration side. It's all the data mining that we're doing. Well, if we're in a position that we're not going to be able to capture the data because of laws, it really becomes a moot point. Our experience in Europe has been because our existing clients here in the United States do shows in Europe and ask us to come with them to do the registration. So we already have part of a broader financial arrangement with our clients there. So we understand going in that there's going to be very, very little lead retrieval for that particular show. We do not find that as much in Latin America, specifically in Mexico, who is really a lot of registration companies have not delved into yet, and we've been relatively successful going there.
When you say Latin American markets, are there specific countries that you have?
Mexico in particular is the one. We've been asked to go into other countries, and it's again asked to go in by our clients who are doing their own shows down there. So once we do a show there, and we get ourselves established, and we know all the different rules of going in. For example, you've got to set up a call center. It's still 20% of our business will come in through a call center. People like to pick up the phone, they don't go through the internet. Well, that means we have to staff operators who are fluent in whatever the language is of the country. You also have time zone differences as well. If our call center is back in Massachusetts, I don't know, say in South America, let's say 3, 4, 5 hour time difference behind us, we have to be able to handle that. So we like to go in very, very slowly, very cautiously, and then expand from there.
So when you say your clients kind of ask you to go along to these trade shows, and these clients are U.S. clients or are these international clients?
They are U.S.-based clients in most cases. There are some that are affiliated with our clients, that they co-produce a show, which are, as in one case, Mexican-based. And then we will produce the show with them.
Now, how about the Asian market? Because I guess based on our discussion, it sounds like Asia is a very different market. Tell us your experience with that part of the world.
Two answers. It's saturated already. The whole world is racing in to want to do shows in Asia, specifically in China. My colleague and I went to Shanghai some years ago to actually witness how the day of show actually occurs. Now, my experience in the United States is that 80 to 90% of attendees pre-register for a show. So they've either had their badge mailed to them at home or their office, and they're all set. They can go right on the show floor. Or they're going to what's called a badge holder pickup, which is where they come on to the show, they verify their badge. They can do it all basically almost freestanding. They don't even have to have human interaction. In China, which I guess they are inbred to stand in lines, they do not pre-register for a show. So you could have 50, 75, 100,000 people, just a sea of humanity, all coming up and registering for the show, and they could be standing outside for hours, going through the entire process. So it's a very, very slow process to basically to change the culture and the thinking that you don't have to do it the way you're doing it. We're trying to make it easier. To be honest with you, I haven't been there for a number of years, so I don't know how much success they've had, but there are so many registration companies over there, so many trade show producers, that we'd be entering a market that is so saturated and such a great distance, I just don't think it'd be worth our while at this point.
Now, you're talking about registration, but what about the data, the lead retrieval, the data mining side?
Registration and lead retrieval. With China, they are still back to putting a business card in a fishbowl. And where you have American companies and Canadian companies that are exhibiting in China, they're used to lead retrieval. So we're also waiting for them to make more demands of show management to say, I don't want to sort through all these business cards. I want to be able to do it all electronically, and gradually they will start to change. When that occurs, we might look at entering into that market. But right now, you're dealing with the attendees who are not big on pre-registering and not utilizing lead retrieval. That's not really a market that we'd want to enter into.
So, but at the same time, you said the Asian market is saturated. So do you think there are differences in objectives in terms of putting on trade show there for companies? Why are they there? Why would they do trade shows there when the practice is so different?
Fastest growing economy. It's I cannot believe the number. And I mentioned to you the large convention centers of 4 cities in the United States. They have 3 or 4 of those million-square-foot convention centers just in Shanghai, much less Beijing. I mean, all these cities. I mean, the number of cities that have more than 1 million residents in them. Everybody is tripping over themselves to get into this economy. I'm talking over the last 5 or 6 years, as quickly as they possibly can. And I know one company is there, I won't mention, that they're losing money, a registration company. They're Australian-based. They're losing money left and right. But no, we've got to be here. We want to get in on the ground floor. And as everything improves, we'll be right there. And I'm just saying, okay, so that's their business model.
So I guess if you have a crystal ball, where would be, when do you think Asia would catch up to how we are running conventions right now?
I think very quickly. I think within 3 to 5 years, and quite frankly, it's been about 4 or 5 years since I've been there, so my guess is it's happening all the time. But I would think within 3 to 5 years they could very much be there. God knows they've got the infrastructure in place from these beautiful convention centers that they have built. They got to have everything else catch up. And it's not just the convention centers. You got to have hotels built around the convention centers. It's one of the things about it. It's still a mystery to me. The Javits Convention Center in New York City. You know, you better get out a pair of binoculars to find the closest hotel, because you're not going to find one. It's built out on the west side on 34th Street, and the New Yorker Hotel, which is about 4 blocks away, is the closest. Most big convention centers all have major hotels within a walking distance, so China's got to do that as well.
Wow. Now, bring it back to Hawaii. At the beginning, you were saying that because of our geographical constraint, it's really difficult to attract these gigantic B2B trade shows here. But are there ones that you know about? Have you been here for these trade shows?
We have a client, American Chemical Society, and then they have a special show every 5 years called Pacific Chem, PacChem. Comes in 2010, and it's coming up again in 2015. I don't remember, and obviously it's all Pacific Rim attendees, and they're doing it specifically for that reason, because ACS, which I believe, I'm not 100% sure, I do not think they're in the same venue in the 48 states every year. I think they move around, but it makes it very difficult for Pacific Rim countries, attendees, exhibitors to come to the mainland. So that's why they do the show here every 5 years. I don't remember the number of attendees they have, but it's been a pretty successful show. And I'm not saying that, I mean, Hawaii does a great job. I've been here at the American Psychiatric Association show we had here a couple of years ago. The convention center, the hotels, they're great to deal with. It's getting the exhibitors convinced of why they should spend the money to come here to produce a show. That's the issue.
Yeah, I guess that's always been an issue. Our state does a great job in marketing ourselves as a visitor's destination, but when I go out and talk about education programs, executive education programs, the question that they always ask is, why are we coming to Hawaii?
Right.
We should be going to the mainland, something that's it's more serious if you go to the mainland as opposed to coming here to Hawaii.
You had mentioned earlier when you kind of smiled when I said that there's a trade show for the trade show industry. Hawaii is usually front and center in those shows, both PCMA, don't remember what PCMA stands for, and the Expo trade show, which are two major trade shows for the industry. And Hawaii's CVB. It usually has a big booth, big presentation, because the people who go to those two shows are trade show producers who are looking for different cities and different venues to produce their shows. And Hawaii's always sitting out there saying, hey, take a look at us, here's what we can offer, the hotels, the climate, you don't have to worry about weather. I mean, I look at shows that take place in Chicago in January and I shake my head sometime. I'm saying, what do you do if you have a major snowstorm and flights get canceled? You don't have that problem here. Hawaiian Airlines, the best on-time airline in the U.S. So there's a lot of opportunity, and Hawaii is very good about being front and center when they can pitch what we have to offer here.
Wow, that's great. Well, let me ask you a slightly different question here, because we've been talking about the trade show, your experience. How did you get into convention management?
Well, I ran a company called Bass Tickets in San Francisco for 15 years, 1985 to just a little bit before 97. It was a licensee of Ticketmaster, and we licensed their software, but we did not manage it the way Ticketmaster managed it, but I became really good friends with their founder of Ticketmaster, which was Fred Rosen. And in 1997, when the owners of my company, Bass, decided to sell, they sold it to a bunch of young venture capitalists. In 1997, the internet was starting to fly high at that point, and these guys knew everything about money and technology and the internet, and they knew nothing about running our business. And let's just say we did not get along after a couple of years. So I called Fred he had sold Ticketmaster at that point, and I said, what are you doing now? He says, well, I just bought a company called Media Live. They were called Key 3 Media at the time. And I'm based down in LA. We produce these big technology trade shows, and would you like to run my operations for me? I said, Fred, I don't know anything about trade shows. He goes, don't worry, I didn't know about it either, and let's just all kind of learn together. So that's when I went to work for Media Live, where we produce these technology shows. In the year, late 2000, I think it was right in August of 2000, I went to go work for Media Live. And then, after the tech sector crash, is when I worked for CDS. But the way I got to know them was when I first came to work at Media Live, I realized we were doing registration in-house. and it was horrible how it was being done. We had these 7 full-time employees. It was impossible to change things. Nothing was tying out. So here's a big company which does technology trade shows, which has god-awful technology that we're using for registration. So I went out, I did my due diligence, I started meeting these different registration and lead retrieval companies, met the owner and founder of CDS, and we hired him as our registration company. And then I moved to Massachusetts to go work for him.
Wow, that's great. Now, a more personal question, bringing you back to Hawaii. What are your plans? And I know I see you very often here at the college. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
I wake up every morning and I pinch myself as saying, there's no way, this has all got to be a dream what I'm doing. I wound up taking a docent position after I went through my, I think it was 8 or 9 weeks of docent training at the Waikiki Aquarium, where I work with kids in grades K through 6 from all over the island. I'm absolutely shocked of how knowledgeable these kids are about conservation, the respect for the ocean, the water, everything. It's just fabulous. And then there's the other end of this, where I am lucky enough to have some guest speaking appearances at the UH to both the masters and the undergraduates about my experiences, crisis management, leadership, marketing, trade shows. As a class, Dr. Wills was good enough to let me teach the class on trade shows. And then the other joy I have is being a volunteer at the Iolani Palace. I mean, there's such history in that building. That's about as chicken skin as it gets every time I set foot in that building. Just wonderful people to deal with. So
thank you so much, Doug. It's really great to have you here in Hawaii, and I have to thank you on behalf of some of the students because you have so much experience to share with them.
Thank you.
It was great talking to you. My guest here is Mr. Doug Levinson, Chairman of the Board of Convention Data Services, and we were talking about his experience for over 30 years in convention management. My name is Alice Lee Hagan, host of Business Education Spotlight, ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll be back next week, Thursday, same time.